Hi everyone, Angus Campbell here. Now Friday the 25th of October, and as anticipated, following yesterday's video, the oil feed non-return valve, spring and ball bearing have arrived that sit on the inside of the pump. So we can now go ahead and fit the pump into the timing case. If you read the workshop manual, quite rightly it says that the pump and its worm drive on the crank should be fitted together. Otherwise, quite rightly, you can't slide the pump over its studs to clear the nut, the lock nut on the end of the crank and its associated tab washer. And that's correct. However, you can do that if you take out a couple of the mounting studs for the oil pump and just leave one in there to spin with. And there's three mounting studs altogether, so if you obviously take two out, you'll be able to get the pump on all right and put these two in. With the three studs, they're all quarter UNF nuts that go on the end of it, and here's the mounting points. Now on this stud, what would be this stud here, for some reason they put a tab washer and a plain nut, and on the other two they put a plain washer and a lock nut. So what I've done with these two studs, as you'll see in a moment, is I've removed that stud and that stud. So to replace this stud, as it normally lives in there just with a plain nut, then I've got another nut to use as a lock nut so we can make sure it's wound in. I've made up a small tab washer because this doesn't come in the kit at all, and the way that this works is well, that might not be good enough. I probably need actually longer arms on these tabs so that they fold over the side. And if that's in there correctly, actually, these two tabs here do push against that ridge there. It's been turned into it actually, and then this centre tab is turned over onto the nut. So actually those tabs are just long enough to catch. Okay, so that will just work. Tempting to put a spring washer on there too. Why there's a plain nut on there and a lock nut on these two, I've no idea, but that's how it is in the parts book here. So there's your plain nut, stud, tab washer at that end of the pump. There's nothing else that goes on the end of that stud other than that nut, and then you've got the two lock nuts on the two studs at the main body end. Mystery. If anybody can explain that, please do. So we'll get these parts over to the bike, and then we'll fit them up. Okay, we're all set to go. Got all the parts here down on the floor with a couple of 7/16 spanners, mole grips just to begin getting the studs in. There we go. I think the biggest challenge though is going to be getting the oil pressure release valve to stay in and make sure it's seating. So we're first just going to do a test fit of that spring and that ball bearing. I might have to use some grease here, I think.
because I'm not quite sure. Let's just get the gasket out of the way. Not quite sure how that's going to stay in. I might be able to grease it, yeah, up against the pump, the ball bearing. With the gasket, I don't need to mess about with gasket cement. That's just to ensure you get a good, reasonable seal between the two faces. But you're in an oil environment anyway within this inner case, so it's not there to prevent oil seepage. So I shan't be using any gasket cement. In any event, we don't want to run the risk of any going into the channels, the oil ways. Right, just making sure I'm putting that non-return valve in the right hole. So it's the upper right. Just check, I'm sure it is. Yep, found a diagram of it. Don't know if you can see that very well. In the workshop manual, and that shows it definitely in the top right hand position. I was pretty sure of that, but always best to check. And so the pump goes on like so. So the top right is that hole there, and that is chamfered to accept the ball. So let's get a bit of grease, see if we can hold that ball in place. Okay, I've just put a thin smear of grease on the chamfer that the ball sits in, and as you can see, it does hold it. Whoops, as you can't see, there it is. You can turn it upside down and it still holds it, which is good. So what we can do then is get the gasket in place. We'll just have to make sure it's in the right position when we put the stud in at this end. We've got the studs ready to go, and we just want to gently push this on like so. Gasket's up. There it is. That's now screwing in. Need to keep a little bit of pressure on the pump. That one's screwing in too. Need to get a bit of pressure on the pump so it doesn't accidentally pop out and we lose that oil return valve seated. What I will be doing before we start this motor up ultimately is we will be spinning it and checking that oil is flowing and returning and we're getting good pressure before we even start to think about that. Right. One thing I have done here is I've got the incorrect plain washers, so we'll just put that plain nut on the wrong stud for now, just to hold that pump in place. Until I get the right washers out of the tin. So, just making sure that one goes on okay, which it does. That's good. That's the little homemade tab washer, so that fits fine. Just going to bend the nut tab over just a little tiny bit to make it easier to finally bend when we've tightened up. Here she goes. Okay. Right, let's just go and get the correct size plain washers for the two lock nuts. Better. Nice and snug. I'm just going to put the lock nuts on there because I think that should be tight enough, and it is, to spin in the stud. The studs are pretty free on the thread anyway, but we just want to make sure we use all the UNC thread at the other end and they're seated home nicely. And once that happens with these two studs with the lock nuts, then the lock nut should start to turn. Tighten up the pump, which it's now doing. Okay, that's one. So that means now we can undo this top plain nut and replace that with a plain washer and the lock nut. This one's not quite on all the way yet. The pump's beginning to pop out slightly against the non-return valve spring. That's better. That's better. Just firm but not tight yet because we don't want to distort the pump. However, these later pumps are steel, iron stroke steel, not aluminium, and apparently they They're a lot stronger and are less liable to distort under heat and under normal operation, as well as when fitting. Right, plain washer on there. Lock nut. Washer's a little tight. There it goes. Here it's going. Tab washer, the real nut. Actually, the stud's going in just on that nut anyway. That's stopped now. So we'll just give it a couple of threads in and put this one on. Off she goes. Just want to make sure there's a minimal amount of thread on the other side of the nut once it's home. There we go. Lock nut out of the way. And there we are, nice and tight. I need to check the torque settings for those three nuts, which I'll do. And then we just need to bend over the central nut tab on that tab washer. And that's that job done. Pretty straightforward. So, not much left to do on this side now before we begin thinking about fitting the inner cover. So that'll be a job for the next video, I think. Preparation for that. Also, just need to check the cam timing with the crank as well, make sure that's correct first before we put this cover on. And I think that's about all there is to say at the moment. Just to remind you that the spindle in the oil pump also drives the tacho cable, and there's a further spindle that goes on the end of this one once the inner cover is on, but we've got all those parts. They were missing from the bike when I bought it, but I've managed to locate a kit, so that's here already. So I think that's about it for now. Just pop you back to the bench and we'll just have a quick run through of what we're going to do next, because while we're focusing on trying to complete the timing side, then we're thinking ahead about the next jobs.
So any time now we're ready to fit the final drive sprocket. We've got a chain 110 pitches, 3/8/5/8. What other things we've got going on? Oh yeah, I was just sorting bits and pieces out and realised that the auto advance unit, which came with the bike, and it's probably its original one, was seized. But that's beginning to free up nicely now, and it's returning against its own springs, so that's good. And yeah, the other quick bit of news that I forgot to mention was that I took this morning I took a trip over 2 hours each way to Bantam John at Sheffield British Motorcycles in Chesterfield, and dropped the barrel off so that it could have liners inserted and bored out to the pistons. And then while that's going on, we can carry on with the timing and primary drive. So next thing is the primary inner case, and that's cleaned up really well in the ultrasonic cleaner. And what I'm doing now is going to clean up and polish the outer surface, which was polished originally. You can see it's got quite a lot of scars on this, but what I tend to do with these bikes as well is I'm not going to spend a lot of time filing those scars out. They're part of its history to me, so we're going to polish this case up nicely, but probably leave those there. In the same way that, you know, as an indication to its history as well, we've left the rear engine plates chromed, and one or two other bits and pieces we've left alone too. So I think that's all for now for this episode. Thanks very much for watching, everybody. Thanks again for comments and subscriptions. And we'll plough on. It's going to take a little bit, be a bit quicker than we thought, as the barrels are now being repaired. So we've got to crack on with this bottom end so that we're in a position to fit the barrels once they're ready, which I'm told will be about 2 weeks' time. So that'll be good. So we're all moving ahead as planned, and we'll see you again soon. Thanks a lot. Bye bye.